Story 1. Every night, a different person walks down the street and screams for help. We aren't allowed to help them. Looking back, I feel dumb. Completely stupid, actually. I should have known that apartment was far too cheap to be right, even for a studio. I should have known there had to be a catch. The day I moved in was a complete blur. I insisted that no one help me, not wanting to prove any of my family members' suspicions about my character. By late afternoon, all my muscles ached terribly, and my head throbbed. I fell back on my bare mattress, staring up at the ceiling fan with glazed-over eyes. I pulled the damp strands of hair from my sweaty forehead, wincing in disgust. Someone knocked on my door, causing me to jump. I cursed under my breath, pushing myself up on my elbows. 2 girls were peeking around my doorframe. Foolishly, I had left it wide open, forgetting the old college rule. Only leave your door open if you want to make new friends. And I was not in the mood to make new friends. One of them, an Asian girl with choppy black hair, was grinning at me. The other stood a little further back, fingering a box of Marlboro Reds. "Hey," she said, nodding at me. Her voice was smooth and raspy at the same time. "Did you just move in?" I laid back down, rubbing my face with both hands, choosing not to bother with manners. "Yeah, about 5 seconds ago. Cool." The girls walked in, evidently ignoring my very clear body language. The girl with the black hair ran her fingers along the edge of my desk, and then picked up a little ceramic duck from my unpacked box of trinkets. "Grandma," I explained, feeling strangely defensive. "Cute," she replied, holding it up to her face. "Has anyone told you yet?" The other girl asked abruptly, looking around my apartment. She had tucked the cigarettes into the back pocket of her jeans, and was now tugging at her long red braids. "Jesus, Gianna, give her a second." "Well, she needs to know." "Yeah, but we haven't even asked her name." I blinked at the 2 strangers incredulously. I hadn't even had time to put toilet paper in my bathroom, and here they were, touching my things, and talking about me like I wasn't there. I just wanted to take a nap, honestly. "My name's Arden," I said. The girl with the red braids, Gianna, sat down next to me on my bed. "Did they tell you?" "Tell me what?" "Oh, of course they didn't. The rules." I blinked again, my face blank. I didn't know about any rules, besides the typical renting ones. I had signed the lease after, at best, skimming over it. The landlord was a skinny woman who smelled of ashes, and I was fairly certain she had never developed the facial muscles necessary for smiling. I wasn't about to ask her any follow-up questions, especially when the rent was so cheap. The other girl laughed nervously. "Where did you move here from?" I ignored her. "What rules?" Gianna got a strange, wicked sort of smile on her face, bouncing a little on my mattress. The other girl sighed loudly. "Something happens here every night," she began, pulling out my rickety office chair and sitting down. "Something weird." "Like what?" I sat up, frowning at her. Finally, my interest was piqued. "Someone walks down the street," Gianna said, her voice reminding me of a camp counselor telling a scary story around the bonfire. "That one, right down there." She pointed at my window. "It's someone different each night. They scream for help for about an hour, but we aren't supposed to help them." I just stared at her. I felt a small chill run up my spine. I didn't know what to make of all this. "It happens at a different time every night," the other one said softly. "We never know when it's coming." "Why?" She shrugged almost sadly. "We don't know why." I scoffed, leaning my elbows against my knees. "I don't believe you," the girl shrugged. "You don't have to. You'll see for yourself." The look in her eyes made me want to believe her. She seemed sincere, but I couldn't even begin to fathom what they were saying being true. It was too strange, too outlandish. I knew this wouldn't be the nicest neighborhood, but it couldn't be that bad. It had to be a prank. They had to be hazing me or something. "We'll come back later," Gianna said matter-of-factly. "We'll show you." Before I could protest, she grabbed the other girl by the wrist, and they were gone. I followed them to the door, watching them march down the hall, talking to each other in hushed voices. I closed my door behind them. That night, as promised, they came back. They came dragging along 2 boys. One was somewhat muscular, wearing a tight black t-shirt and baggy jeans, and my eyes were instantly drawn to a silver heart-shaped locket around his neck. He smiled at me and introduced himself as Will when he walked in. The other boy was smaller, but chubbier, and nervous-looking, with a buzz cut and ill-fitting cargo shorts. His name, I was told, was Matteo. The girl named Gianna came in carrying a bottle of wine, and that same slightly crumpled box of cigarettes. The other one, the girl I still didn't know the name of, was the only one who looked even somewhat apologetic. They all sat down on my dusty floor, next to the window, and motioned for me to join them. I sat between Will and the nameless girl, unsure whether I should continue feeling violated, or if I should just give in to my strange, pushy neighbors. "Do you all live in this building?" I asked, hesitantly accepting the wine when it was passed to me. "Yeah," Will answered with a grin. It seemed half-hearted. "This building is where all the young people live. It's where they put us," Gianna cut in, lighting a cigarette. It didn't even occur to me to tell her not to smoke inside. "We've all been sorted out. Forgive her, she's a bit of a conspiracy theorist." "It's not a theory," she snapped, glaring at him. "Look at the other ones. Next door, the middle-agers, people with kids, but no grandkids. Across the street, old people. Not a single 20-something in that entire building, may tell him." So her name was May. I looked her over, admiring her smoky eye makeup and how she'd tied her hair up, long strands poking out like exploding fireworks. "Stop it," May muttered, reaching for the wine bottle. "You'll scare her." "I'm not scared." She just shrugged at me, as if she didn't believe me. We passed the bottle around, and then around again. I listened to them bicker and laugh. It was clear they'd all been friends for a while, and I felt a little bit like I was intruding, even though they were in my apartment. Will asked me if I had gone to college, and I told him I did, but I dropped out. They all nodded sympathetically, which made me feel stupid. By midnight, I was a little bit buzzed, and my guard was beginning to fall. I had to admit, it felt good to have friends. I had already mentally resigned myself to a life of solitude, at least for a while. But it seemed that might not actually have to be my fate. I laughed at Matteo and Jaina's drunken argument, passing a cigarette back and forth with May, blowing the smoke out of my open window. I had almost completely forgotten why they were all over when it happened. All at once, a blaring alarm came from each of our phones, like an Amber Alert. I could hear the sound echo throughout the neighborhood, like an entire chorus of hundreds of phones going off, not just ours. I nearly leaped out of my skin. Not even Gianna laughed. All of them went quiet, and they looked at me as I took it out, frowning at the screen. "Do not interfere. It's coming," Will whispered. He had changed, his eyes almost glassy, and his voice soft and shaky. Matteo squeezed his shoulder. I looked at May. Her eyebrows were cinched together in concern, and she was stubbing out our cigarette against the windowsill, shrinking away. There it was again, that chill. It crept up my back, spreading along my scalp and making me shiver. Something felt deeply, deeply wrong. The others were quiet now, staring silently at the window I was sitting up against. The air felt somehow warmer, like it was buzzing with something. Or maybe I was just sweating. We sat there, unmoving, for what felt like half an hour. Right as I was getting tempted to ask what was going on, I heard it. It was far away, and faint, but I still heard it. A cry. It continued, as it got gradually closer, louder, more desperate. "Help. Please, my God, someone help me." Slowly, I leaned out the window. I had to see it with my eyes, had to confirm. There was actually someone out there like they had said there would be. My new apartment was on the 4th floor, so it was hard to see who was down on the street without squinting. In the flickering streetlights, I could make out the outline of an elderly man. He was hunched over, wandering aimlessly from door to door, wearing only what looked like a hospital gown to cover his pale, broken body. Behind him trailed a path of dripping blood, although I couldn't see where it was coming from. "Please, I'm hurt." I looked back at the others, my mouth hanging open. "What is this?" I demanded loudly. "What the hell is this?" May touched my arm, trying to calm me down. I pulled away from her. "Arden, please. We have to help him." "Why can't we help him? He's just an old man. We can't help him." "Trust me." I ignored her, leaning further out the window, prepared to call out to him. Before I could open my mouth, I froze. The man down there was still now, facing our building. His head was tilted upwards, and I couldn't see his eyes, but I knew he was looking right at me. I immediately felt cold, like I was plummeting into ice water. "Help me," he whimpered into the silent night air, his voice barely audible. Then he began to scream. That scream wasn't human. Or, at least, not any human I had ever met. It was desperate, agonized. It made my stomach turn, and my eyes prick with tears. I couldn't look away. The blood was coming from his arms. Or, I should say, his lack of arms. Where his arms should have been, there were only bloody, mangled stumps. They looked fresh. He didn't move other than a shaky sway, and his eyes didn't leave me. His shriek slowly molded into words that I could just barely understand. "Please, please, please," May yanked me backwards, away from the window. I landed on my ass, and yelped in pain and horror. "What is that thing?" I whispered. I didn't mean to whisper, but that was all that came out. We don't know, May replied, her eyes trained on Will, who was crying now. Mateo held on to him like he might topple over. We just know to follow the rules. What happens if you don't follow the rules? I asked, and immediately regretted it. Will sobbed softly. Outside, the old man wailed. Gianna reached over and pulled the window shut, but it somehow did nothing to muffle the blood-curdling sound. Do you want to tell her, or should I? Mateo asked Will. Will just shook his head. He was clutching his locket now, turning the little heart over between his fingers. Mateo sighed and turned towards me. A couple of months ago, one of them got to Will's girl, Shannon. Gianna butted in. Her name was Shannon. Sorry, her name is Shannon. I swallowed, but whatever I did, nothing would force down the lump in my throat. What happened? Mateo shook his head. We don't know. We were all together when the screaming started. Usually we just ignore it now, you know. No use in dwelling on it. But that night, we think she saw something different. She started insisting she had to help, and she ran outside. We couldn't stop her. He paused, glancing over at Will. He was silent and still. The screaming outside had begun to pass, getting softer as it continued further down the street. Then what? He shrugged. Nothing. She was just gone. I pressed my lips together, trying to process all of this. I really had believed they were messing with me, but I had seen it. I had witnessed it firsthand, and it terrified me. Why doesn't anyone leave? He shrugged for a second time. Can't afford it, or people just don't care. Some people have left, but we all signed an NDA with the lease, so nobody ever knows. I frowned, thinking back to signing the paperwork, trying to remember. I could vaguely picture what he was talking about. I had just assumed it was more legal jargon that I would never understand. Had I seriously signed a non-disclosure agreement without even noticing? After that, I told them I wanted to go to bed. I needed time to process all of this. They understood, and each one of them said goodbye before leaving me alone. As I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, for some strange reason, I thought of May's face when we had realized it was happening. How she'd put out the cigarette and backed away from the window. Eventually, I was able to drift off to sleep. The next few weeks were difficult. I spent more and more time with my new neighbors. I came to find that they were right. I didn't think there was a single person older than 30 in our entire building, but I saw them all the time leaving the one next door. Settling in was difficult. The others seemed so used to it. They cared, of course. It scared them, especially Will. But you could tell they had been here a while by the way they sighed, closing the blinds, and focusing harder on whatever they were doing. Eventually, I began to mimic them. It helped a little bit to pretend it was normal, as strange as that sounds. Moving out wasn't really an option for me, anyways. I was a college dropout, and I hadn't found a job yet. I was still just getting by on what I had managed to save up. Every night, it was someone different. Some were more human, some seemed less. Some were drenched in blood, their clothes ripped and strange, but some looked fairly normal. The worst were the children. They would run like injured chickens, screeching and banging on doors, begging for help. Sometimes they would try different things, say different things, like they're coming, like I don't want to die, or even I'm sorry. There were a lot of children. One night, while I was half awake, an alarm went off. It wasn't like the one on our phones. It was blaring, only somewhat muffled by my window. My apartment glowed a flashing red from outside. I didn't even look. I was too scared of what I might see. I just covered my head with my pillow and tried to fall back asleep. I came to learn all of the theories, especially from Gianna. She thought we had all been chosen and predetermined to live here, all for some sick little government game. She thought maybe there were people betting on the different buildings, putting down money on who would interfere the least. See that? She said to me one day in the hallway, returning from a coffee run. Cameras everywhere. I didn't know if I believed her. I spent time with May, mostly. We smoked on the front steps, and people watched. It was strange to see what at night was such a sinister and gruesome neighborhood during the day. Bright and lively. She didn't talk much about the rules, so I didn't either. We didn't talk all that much in general, I found, just enjoying each other's company. Right when I was beginning to feel comfortable was when it happened. It started with a birthday cake. Happy birthday. As May walked through the door, Mateo blew into his plastic party horn. The paper inflated, smacking Will on the side of the head. May's hand flew to her heart. Jesus Christ, you fuckers know I hate surprises. Gianna laughed and walked over to her. In her hands she held a chocolate cake. haphazardly adorned with sprinkles and bright pink icing, that read "Happy Birthday May" in the center 24. She set down the cake on the dresser and threw her arm around May's neck. "How does it feel?" "Fucking awful." "That's the spirit." "Enough of this," Mateo cut in, weaving between them. "Let's eat some cake, then let's go." Their tradition, I had learned, was to bar hop for birthdays. They told me there was no curfew here, despite the rules, just a recommended time to be home, which was 10:30 p.m. Usually, they said, they got home before the alarm, or spent the night somewhere else. We all took some cake. The boys took shots in the kitchen to pregame, while I watched Gianna fuss over May's hair. I was never much of a partier. While at clubs or bars in college, I spent most of the time out back, chatting with the smokers. But then again, I was never much of a friend group person either, so maybe the circumstances were changing. I watched them all troop outside to Mateo's car. I stuffed myself in the back, incredibly conscious of how close I was pressed into May. My other shoulder rammed into the car door. Mateo's music, cranked up to maximum volume, hurt my ears, and the tiny space was packed with the smell of tobacco and various perfumes as we sped down the freeway toward the city. But it was nice. It was really nice. I found myself laughing with them, and I hooked my arm around May's when she weaseled her hand beneath my elbow. It was actually nice. As predicted, the bars they chose weren't exactly my scene. But this time, as opposed to college, I could stand it. I took shots. I followed them out for smoke breaks. I even danced under the low purple lights until my feet ached inside my chunky heels, surely riddled with blisters. By the time we got to our third bar, I couldn't even feel it anymore. And it was at that third bar that we crammed ourselves into an old photo booth, and Gianna reluctantly offered $5 to the slot, and we laughed, red-faced, into a tiny camera. After the photos spit out into the compartment, the others slid through the red curtains, but before I could follow, May grabbed my wrist. She held me back, sliding her long baby blue nails up my wrist. I shivered. "You never gave me a birthday present," she whispered, and I could feel her breath on my face. If I was wearing my glasses, they would have been fogging up. Yeah, well, I didn't get to finish my quip before she kissed me. It was nice, and then it wasn't. "Hey," Will called out to me, squeezing through a crowd of men wearing tattered leather jackets to get to me. "Arden, where's everybody else?" I blinked, looking around. I could have sworn they had been right there a second ago, but now none of them were anywhere to be found. I shrugged. "Deno, why? What's up?" He finally broke free from the swaying mass, and I got a better look at him. He looked worried. His face was flushed, and I could see a few drops of sweat creeping out from his hairline. He took his phone out of his pocket and held it out to me. First, I saw his home screen. It was him next to a girl with strawberry blonde hair, both clutching beer bottles and grinning widely at the camera. Then I looked where he actually wanted me to. The time, 1:47 a.m. "It's getting late," he narrated. "Can we find the others and get going?" I understood then. He was worried. It was past 1 a.m., and no alarm yet. It was later than usual. The bars would start closing soon. He wanted to get back before it happened. Will and I weaved through the crowd. I was pretty buzzed, and I realized I was having a hard time moving my feet right, which made me feel embarrassed. I hadn't even had that much to drink. Was I that much of a lightweight? We found them outside, chain smoking. Will explained the situation while I swayed. The drive back was strangely tense. Mateo's music was turned down, and there wasn't any joking or boisterous gossiping like there had been on the way out. We all felt it. It didn't need to be said. Something was off. Will drove fast, almost reckless. In the dark, May took my hand. Just as he was careening around the last corner, and we could almost make out the shape of our apartment building down the street, it happened. All of our phones went off at once. Gianna let out a small shriek from the other side of the back seat. "Do not interfere." Mateo turned back towards us, pressing his finger to his lips. Had this ever happened before? By their reactions, I didn't think so. It was different when I was in my bedroom, when I could just shut the curtains and put my headphones on. I felt so small and helpless then, like I was gazing into the maw of something incomprehensibly beyond my understanding. I felt like we were all flies. In this neighborhood, right now, was the spider's web. Will drove slowly now, maybe 5 miles an hour. We were all still. We were all silent. Not even a stray breath cut through the quiet. Underneath the glowing streetlights, I could make out the side of Will's face. He was pale, and if I hadn't seen his knee shifting as he pressed down on the brakes, I could have mistaken him for a mannequin. The car came to a stop. I followed his gaze, all the way down the street to the dark horizon, and I saw what he saw. A silhouette. It was far too distant to make out what shape it took, but it was evidently humanoid. It moved in a shaky stumble, limping down the middle of the road in our direction. And in the overwhelming silence, I could hear it, far away, but still deeply urgent. "Help me," Will, Gianna hissed. "Turn the car around." Will didn't move. He just stared forward, as white as paper. It didn't make any logical sense, but I knew what he knew. It was too late now. There was no use. "Help me. Please help." I could tell now that it was a girl from its voice, and its figure, as it got closer. It was wearing some sort of white nightgown, not unlike the old man's hospital attire from that first night, stained with dark red blood. From here, I couldn't tell if it was fresh or dry. I didn't know why that mattered to me. "Maybe," May whispered. Her arm shook against mine. "Maybe, if we're quiet and we duck down, it won't see us." Deep down it felt as hopeless as turning round had felt, but it seemed reasonable. I nodded and did as she suggested, crouching behind the passenger seat, my knees throbbing from the strange angle I'd bent myself into. We all did it, except for Will. He didn't move. He still just looked. When he finally spoke, I could barely hear him. It was so weak. "Shannon." The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. Mateo was the one to break the silence. "What?" "Shannon," he repeated, finally turning to look at his friend. "That's Shannon." I peered over the seat in front of me, squinting my eyes. The human-like thing was getting closer, and now I could make out strawberry blonde hair, round face, short legs. The girl from Will's phone, lock screen. The girl who had disappeared. "Shannon," May gasped next to me. "Dude," Mateo said slowly, his words crumbling as soon as they left his mouth. "I know what you're thinking, dude. Do not get out of this car." Will didn't even seem like he was with us anymore. He was in shock, I think, looking back. "I have to help her," he insisted. Right as another sickening cry rang out. "Help me. Help me please. Someone, it hurts." It was getting far too close to us for comfort, but it still didn't seem to notice the car. Its cries became more and more desperate as they got louder. "I have to help her," Will repeated, and a bit of life had returned to his face. Mateo shook his head and grabbed at his sleeve. "Will, that is not Shannon." Will glared at him, his eyes shining with tears. "I know Shannon. That's her. I know you do, dude, and I know you miss her, but please don't do this." Their voices were getting louder and more distraught, and I felt May press into my side, trembling like a leaf. Gianna was whimpering, but I couldn't see her from my position. The thing was almost to our car when it stopped. She turned her head, left, then right, almost like she was sniffing the air. The boys stopped arguing. I felt like my heart would burst out of my chest. I could see Shannon's face now, and I realized why she hadn't seen us. The girl's face was streaked with gore, and it looked like her eyes had been scooped out with a melon spoon. She cried, drool pouring from her slackened mouth, but no tears could come. It happened too quickly. None of us could stop him. Will violently ripped his arm away from Mateo, fumbling for the handle to the car door. Gianna screamed. Mateo tried to slam down on the lock, but he missed, and Will managed to get the door open before he could try again. He stumbled onto the asphalt and hit the ground with a soft crunch. The thing turned her head and began to scream. But instead of charging at Will, she backed away. She held her arms out in front of her, like something might attack her, whipping her head around wildly. An alarm went off, like the one I had heard that one night, but far more unbearable now than I was in it. The streetlights lining either side of the street switched to a flashing red, and Mateo threw himself into the driver's seat, the tires screeching as he peeled away. Gianna was screaming at him, pleading with him to go back. May was weeping into her hands. I didn't move, didn't make a sound. I didn't understand. As we sped away, I looked back. I couldn't help it. I saw the flash of some sort of van in the blinding red light, pulling around the corner, then nothing. That was a week or two ago. I don't know. I've been having a hard time keeping track of time. None of us have spoken much since that night. We tried the police, of course, but as you could assume, nothing came of it. I think whatever this is far larger than we know. I don't know if it's some kind of experiment, or just a sick game, but I'm going to move back into my parents' house next week, despite all their berating, and then figure out what to do from there. I don't know if that was really Shannon that we saw that night, or if it was something else, and I don't know which is worse. All I know is that last night, I heard Will's voice outside my window, crying, pleading for help. I didn't interfere. Story 2. You're gonna give me $100 to sit inside this cardboard box for 2 minutes. You're gonna give me $100 to sit inside this cardboard box for 2 minutes? I asked, feeling the booze slosh around my brain. It's that simple, the street performer said with a cocksure grin. You last 2 minutes inside the box, you get $100. What if I don't make it 2 minutes? You don't get $100. What's inside the box? The street performer opened the top of the large refrigerator box, and, true to his word, it was empty. So what's the catch? My friend Paul said, there's always a catch. No catch. You go in of your own free will. You get out of your own free will. You put 2 minutes between those moments, you get $100. Let me see the money, I said. The street performer didn't look like he had a spare Franklin to part with. He wore a stained threadbare suit, with patches on the elbows and tearing at the sleeves. Atop his head was a busted top hat that looked like it had survived since the Great Depression. His feet were covered in mismatched, filthy docksiders that looked like they'd been hauled up from some mucky swamp. That said, the street performer pulled a crisp and clean $100 bill from under his hat. I feel like, if I go in, you're gonna kick the box or pour old soup on me, or some other stupid shit, or one of those dumbass TikTok pranks. Old soup, I asked, chuckling. Paul laughed. I dunno, man. Old ass clam chowder or something. The street performer shook his head. No sir, I'm not a fan of chowder or pranks, and I don't have any idea what a TikTok is. I'm just an honest man looking to give away $100 to the bravest and boldest among you. That's definitely not you, Paul, I said, laughing. Fuck off, bro, Paul said. You're gonna do it? I asked. Why don't you do it? He shot back. Not bold enough. No, not really. Plus, if I sit down on the ground, I may not be able to get back up. I think I shouldn't have had that last drink. I'm gonna call that Uber. Your name's Paul, correct? The street performer asked my friend. Yeah, Paul, let me ask you this. Could you use $100? Hell yeah, especially after what I spent tonight. Big, brave man like you couldn't be afraid of a simple cardboard box. Fuck no, I'm not. Do you have 2 minutes to spare? How long until the Uber gets here? Paul asked me. 5 minutes, I said. Give or take. Paul looked at the box, and back to the street performer, before glancing at me. What do you think? Is it worth it, man? I don't know. I didn't. The alcohol was not only on top of me, but was beating my temples with rock hammers. I mean, the whole thing is fucking weird, but he hasn't explained a downside. I haven't informed you of any downsides because there isn't one, the street performer said with a wink. This guerrilla marketing for a box company, or do you work for Frigid Air? I asked. No sir, I work for me, myself, and I, the street performer said. Nobody likes having a boss, am I right? Especially if you knew my boss, I said. He makes Attila the Hun look like Daffy Duck. Fuck it, man, Paul said suddenly. I'll do it. Wonderful, the street performer said. Only, Paul added, looking at me. If we can go to the titty bar after I get out. Bro, I am beat, I said, yawning. I don't have the energy. You don't have enough energy to look at boobs. No, I said, surprising myself. I might pass out in the Uber. If you're gonna throw up in the alley, Paul said. They charge extra if they have to clean up any bodily fluids. Maybe I'll puke in the box before you get in. Please don't vomit inside the box, the street performer said. It's one of a kind. These things come off an assembly line, Paul said. Hardly one of a kind. I glanced at my phone, let my vision refocus, and noticed the Uber's arrival time. You got 3 minutes, dude. You going in or not? Fuck it. Let's do it. Who keeps time? Time keeps itself. However, I have a pocket watch to assist us, the street performer said, pulling out a beat-up brass pocket watch from inside his suit jacket. Climb in now, I'll count you down. Paul opened the top flaps and placed one foot inside. He was unsteady on his drunk legs, and I started laughing at his teetering. H flipped me off, steadied himself, and placed the second leg inside. He sat down, shot me a shit-eating grin, and said, I want to go to Golden Apples after. That girl Janine is there this weekend. She's not into you, I said. Yet, he said with a smile before grabbing the flaps and closing himself in the box. Your time starts in 3, 2, 1, the street performer said, watching the second hand on his watch spin past 12. Go. Paul sat there for a minute before he started chuckling. I couldn't help but join in. What even was this? In a million years, I'd never be able to guess that this is where the night would end. Inside a cardboard box. You start by having a few too many cheap domestics during a ball game, and end up probably being hustled by an unhoused guy in a top hat. This is so fucking stupid, I said, barely holding back laughter. They said the same thing about the dog launched into space. Hey Leica, how dark is it up there? I asked. Not very, Paul said, his voice muffled by the cardboard. He started a giggle fit again before adding, I feel like a dumbass. If the shoe fits, I said. The box suddenly jostled violently. It went still for a beat, before rocking back and forth again. From inside the box, I could hear Paul moving and adjusting. Bro, stop moving, I said. I'm not doing that, he said. 30 seconds, the street performer yelled out. Wait a second. It just got dark. Really dark. You can't see the neon light from the bar. No, he said, his voice unsure. Wait, there's some kind of white light, off in the distance. The distance? I asked, confused. You're inside a box. The farthest distance is a foot away. Hey, Mr. Top Hat, is there a screen hidden in here? Like a TV screen or something? The street performer ignored him. What's going on? I asked. There's something approaching the box. Yeah, the Uber, I said with a drunken laugh. No, like there is someone walking toward the inside of the box, Paul said. It looks like a person, but that doesn't make any sense. His voice went from playful drunk to concerned drunk. He was sloshed, but a small part of his brain was still on guard. It told him there was danger around him, but it didn't make any sense, as he was sitting inside a cardboard box on the sidewalk of an empty street. 45 seconds. Paul, stop fucking around. Bro, I'm serious, he said. Some guy, I think it's a guy, anyway, is walking toward me. Wait, oh shit, there are 2, no, 3, fuck, 4. I'm surrounded by shadow figures. Shadow figures, I asked. They look like people, but different. You fucking with me? There aren't any features that I can see. They look like silhouettes. Dude, stop. The joke's not funny anymore. Get out, huh? The Uber is almost here anyway. He hissed. I think they can hear your voice. I turned to the street performer. What's going on here? What's the gag? He ignored me. His eyes stayed trained on the pocket watches, quickly rotating second hand. 1 minute, halfway there, he yelled. I can hear them speaking. It's faint, but what? It doesn't sound like any language I've ever heard. Paul, enough's enough. Come on out, man. Our ride is turning down the street. Oh fuck. I think they saw me, he said, his voice quivering. Who's they, these shadow figures? Oh fuck, he said, fear lacing his words. I heard him start kicking the side of the box from the inside. The cardboard bent with each kick, but never broke. Get moving, I said. I'm trying to run, but my body isn't moving. Dude, you're kicking the box, I said. That's not me. My body is frozen, and they're coming. Holy shit. Get out of the box, Paul. 1 minute 30 seconds. The street performer yelled, best time of the night. One of them is coming for me, Paul said in a panic. Oh God, they have eyes. But not like ours. His eyes, I can see. Paul trailed off. You can see what? Everything, he said. They're showing me everything. 1 minute 40. The money is as good as yours. Stranger, there's fire. It's everywhere. The ground is sizzling. I can feel the heat. It's burning me through my pants. Ah, fuck, what is this? Get out of the box now, Paul. The other 3 are closing in. Their eyes are glowing white. I can see the ends of the earth, the end of the sky. The end of it all, the fires, they burn. Oh God, they burn. Then Paul started screaming. Not, I stubbed my toe screams, but I'm being murdered, and the only person who will ever hear this is my killer screams. Open the box, I yelled at the street performer. Right fucking now. But he didn't move an inch. He kept his eyes trained on his watch. 10 seconds remaining. The street performer yelled. 10. I leaned over and tried to rip open the flaps on top of the box, but they weren't moving. They felt like 1,000 pounds, and I couldn't budge them. I slammed my hand down on the cardboard, and it felt like I had just hit concrete. My hand throbbed, but I tried again to rip the box open to no avail. Push up, Paul, I screamed at the top of the box. Listen to my voice, and come for it. 9, 8, 7. Why are you all showing me this? Paul said through sobs. I don't want to watch them all die. Paul, sit up. Come on, man, sit up. 6, 5, 4. The box was jostling back and forth, being shaken by unseen forces. It jumped an inch off the ground, and rocked around like bored kids beat it with bats. I'm watching them tear me apart, Paul said with a whimper. I'm above them now. I'm being pulled away, but I can see my body. There's so much blood. So much fire. Get out. What's pulling me into the air? Paul asked, his voice sounding distant. 3. Poe. I'm coming. I threw my whole body at the box, trying to knock it on its side. I hoped to see Paul come tumbling out. But when I hit the cardboard, it didn't move an inch. It clanged like it was made from pure steel. I braced myself on the ground and kicked the side of the box with all my might, and instantly felt a lightning bolt of pain rush my leg up and spine. There was nothing I could do. 2. I'm so high I can see it. I can see the, oh my God. No, it can't be. No. Paul screamed, and it sounded like it was falling now. Oh shit, the ground. It's opening. From the sidewalk, I looked up at the street performer with hate in my eyes, and yelled, let him go. You fuck. Open the box. I'm falling through the world. How? Oh no. Oh God. Oh God. Please let me go. 1. And time. The street performer yelled, raising his hands in victory. The box went still. Paul, you won. The street performer exclaimed triumphantly. The first of the night. He calmly tucked his pocket watch back into his jacket pocket. He replaced it with a small, dollar store confetti popper. He gently yanked the string of the popper and blasted bits of colorful paper and glitter into the air. It landed all around me. I lunged at the box and tried to rip open the top again. This time, the flaps moved as easily as expected. But when I pulled them back, Paul wasn't inside. Not a trace of him. The only thing I found was a crisp, new $100 bill. Paul. Paul, what the fuck? Where are you? He's left the box, the street performer said. His 2 minutes were up. I leaped onto my feet, ready to beat the street performer to a pulp. But when I glanced at where he had been standing, he was gone. I hadn't heard him run away, or catch a cab or anything. Like Paul, there was no trace of him. It was like he'd never been there. From behind me, I heard a car downshift and come to a stop on the curb. There was the familiar whine of an electric window being rolled down, followed by a monotonous voice calling out my name. My Uber had arrived. I looked to where the box was, and it was gone, too. All that was left was the $100 bill. You still want your ride, my driver said. Did you see anyone with me? No, he said. There wasn't a man in a busted top hat and a large refrigerator box standing here as you came down the street. I think you made a good decision, calling an Uber, my driver deadpanned, adding, if you puke in my car, there is a cleaning fee. So, if you're gonna yak, just do it now, huh? I felt my legs go weak. I didn't know what to do. My friend was gone, and the man who sent him away had vanished. I didn't even know what to say to the police. Ugh, my friend climbed into a cardboard box and disappeared. No, I'm not drunk. Anymore. You coming or what? This is my busy time. I looked down at the $100 bill, and something caught my eye. Instead of Benjamin Franklin's face staring back at me, someone had scrawled a note. I picked up the note and held it close to my face. I'd know that handwriting anywhere. It was Paul's. The note read, I've seen the end. You don't make it, buddy. You coming? My driver asked. Yeah, I said. I'm coming. That was several hours ago. I've been sitting at my kitchen table, staring at the $100 bill. I'm not sure what to do. My mind is mush, and it has nothing to do with the alcohol. I'm at a crossroads and don't know where to go. I don't know what to say to Paul's family. How do I even begin to explain this? I keep thinking I'm having a nightmare as I sleep one off, but I'm not. I'm sitting stock still in my kitchen as the first rays of the sun turn the black sky purple. There's a vice around my heart, a profound loss for my friend, and fear for the message he left behind. I've seen the end. You don't make it. Story 3. I have a fear of abandoned houses. To be clear, it's not a phobia. A phobia is an irrational fear, after all. And my fear is very fucking rational indeed. I was homeless. By choice, actually. Lived that way for a few years. I juggle. Just something I picked up as a kid, and believe it or not, that's enough to keep you fed and then some. An hour or two in front of a red light, and you're done. I liked my life, the freedom of it. I had a bit of money saved back, in case of bad weather, but most days I would work a couple hours and have the rest of the day to myself. But as agreeable as I found this lifestyle, finding a warm, semi-safe place to sleep was easier said than done. So I thought to myself, why not look for an abandoned house to squat in? A lot of people who can't pay rent, or don't want to do exactly that, my state has laws that protect us. So I went to a hardware store, and I bought a padlock, as well as a couple other things. My plan was to find a place where nobody else was staying yet, slap a lock on the door so I don't have to share my space, and live it up rent-free in some neglected dump. That's how I found my way to 3494, Lucky Fern Road. The place was abandoned for sure. That first night, I found the door was already unlocked, and the place was mostly clean. Oh sure, there was dust everywhere, but that's to be expected. I made my way into the kitchen. I figured if there was any food lying around that was out of date, that would confirm that this place is truly abandoned. As I opened the fridge, I was greeted with an absolutely vile odor. The walls inside, covered with mold, and a rotten glob of what used to be meat, sat on a tray in the middle shelf. I took a moment to collect myself, and recover from the waves of nausea, before making my way up to the bedroom. It was mostly empty, although a dresser had been left behind. I dumped my few but precious possessions into one of the drawers, and turned my attention to the padlock, and the length of chain I'd purchased with it. The front door already had a bolt on it, which was fortunate, but the back door didn't seem to have any sort of locking mechanism at all. A bit odd, a distinct security risk at the very least. I recoiled, pulling my hand back as I touched the doorknob. It was hot, almost felt as if it nearly burned me in that brief instant. I tentatively poked it a moment later. Cool. Normal. At the time, I wrote it off as some weird nerve thing in my head. Either way, I made my way upstairs. It was late, and I needed sleep. The bedroom door has a working lock, so I knew at least I'd be safe in here, even if a like-minded, but less peaceful squatter saw fit to come around THR back and break in. When I woke up, I was greeted by scorching, unbearable heat. This was early October, so naturally, I was highly confused. When I looked out the window, a cold, hard ball of fear formed in my gut. The other houses on the street were fucking demolished. They were in shambles. Ruins, even. The sky was a dark, heavy gray, but it didn't look like rain. It just looked dead. There was no sound, and very little light, and just as I was about to open the bedroom door to investigate further, I stopped. Every instinct was ablaze, and as I stepped back, the wooden floor creaked a bit under my weight. I felt like I was falling, as paralyzing terror gripped me, seemingly without rhyme nor reason. Then, footsteps. Fast, very fast, something running. The doorknob rattled, as somebody on the other side tried to twist it open to no avail. Rattling gave way to loud slamming, and I started to think that whoever was on the other side wanted to break down the door. I grabbed the chain, and with trembling hands, I snapped the padlock onto one end. I turned to the door, anxiously waiting for the rattling and slamming to stop, or for whatever psycho was on the other side to break through, so I could brain them. And after a couple agonizingly long minutes, the noise did stop. It was replaced with the sound of a blaring siren from outside. I heard the person on the other side of the door scramble, running away now, as the siren wailed outside. The gray sky, the dilapidated houses, even the street, had taken on a reddish hue, a crimson saturation permeating as far as I could see. And as it did, I saw somebody stumble out of one of the ruined neighboring houses. They were holding something in their hands. A baseball bat, I think. They looked to something I could not see, down the street. I'd have to open the window to get a good look. Instead, I watched him drop his weapon, drop to his knees, and start sobbing. His hand rose to his face, and slowly, he drove his thumbs into his own eyes. His screams were of pain, but somehow, I instinctively knew this was an act of grief. For what, I was unsure. I crouched down, my face in my hands. I was shaking in abject animal terror, and as the siren wailed on, it too was joined, now by a wet slippery slithering sound. I resisted the temptation. I would not look. As I crouched under the window, for a brief moment, the light of the red sky went black, as something very fucking large began to pass by. It halted, and I wanted to vomit or cry or do something, but I stayed small, quiet, and hidden, and I waited some more. The slithering resumed, and soon the dim red light returned. When it did, I let out a shaky sigh of relief. What I did not know at the time is that I would be stuck here for just under 48 hours. The siren came back every few hours, and every time, I hid in silence, refusing to look. I had food and water, thanks to my lifestyle, stashed in the drawers, and although I'm not proud of it, I didn't even step out to use the restroom. Then, as I was eating a can of baked beans, and starting to consider the possibility that the rest of my, probably very short life, might be spent in this room, I blinked, and the light changed. When I looked outside, the neighborhood was normal again. Blue sky, a bit cloudy, people in the road. I got the fuck out of there, with the most absolute of haste. That was a couple years ago now. But one thing really stuck with me. My intuition. It's normally nothing special, But during those 48 hours, it was like my subconscious mind had a direct, one-way line to my conscious brain. Everything seemed so clear. I knew, even without looking, that had I gazed upon whatever cast that behemoth shadow, I would meet a terrible fate. I knew, a moment before I heard it, that opening that bedroom door was a very bad idea. And when I walked out of that house, out of that neighborhood, and got a one-way ticket out of that fucking city, I had this nagging, persistent notion. It was a trap. The house, it wasn't real. It was like a spider's web. I'm not homeless anymore. And I sure am glad of it. Because today, I once again found myself in a strange part of town, for reasons irrelevant, and as I looked up at another abandoned house, nothing like the last, I instantly knew that this one was a trap. 2. It's not just 1, or 2, or 10. They're everywhere. They look like forgotten, abandoned homes, down to dust and grime, and even forgotten food in the kitchen. Unless you've been in one before, you can't possibly distinguish them from the real thing, and even then, there are no physical signs. All you have to go on is your gut instinct. Story for... I solved a famous Reddit mystery, and it ruined my life. It started with a single image of a cicada, black background, with simple white text. I was scrolling through a cryptography subreddit, late at night, trying to distract myself from another evening of insomnia, when someone posted it. Here's something interesting, they wrote, as if they didn't know the rabbit hole it would lead to. The message on the image was simple. We are looking for highly intelligent individuals. This is a test. Below that, a string of random-looking numbers and letters, just sitting there like a dare. I don't know what made me save it to my desktop. Maybe it was boredom, or maybe it was the voice in my head that said, "You've always been good at puzzles. Why not try? Let's put that master's degree to use." The key was hidden in the image's metadata, buried beneath its surface. At first, I thought the image was just a clever decoy, just white text on black, wanting you to waste hours chasing nothing. But when I opened it in a hex editor, the truth started to reveal itself. Among the strings of data, I found a clue. A URL leading to an unassuming page with an image of a duck. My stomach sank. Ah, trolled, I thought, until I remembered something from an old forum post about steganography. The message wasn't in the image itself, but within it, encoded. A free online tool exposed the hidden text, a long string that looked like gibberish at first glance, but resolved into another URL when decoded. By this point, I wasn't the only one working through the puzzles. Reddit was going wild online, the mystery spreading like wildfire. After the first couple puzzles were solved, it started to feel like there was a real mystery behind all of it. This wasn't just some clever college kid making puzzles to troll Reddit. There seemed to really be something to all of it. The second URL led to a page, just plain black text on white. "Congratulations," it read. "You've made it this far. But there's still a long way to go." Below the message was another string of text. A Caesar cipher. Shifting the letters back by a set number, revealed another cryptic message. A reference to a line in the Mabinogion, an old collection of Welsh mythology. I didn't own a copy, but I found a scanned version online. My hands hovered over the keyboard, fumbling slightly as I searched for the passage. The solution wasn't in the words themselves, but in the placement of the letters. A careful pattern revealed yet another URL. The next page wasn't as simple. Instead of text, it hosted an audio file, low and distorted. Spectrogram analysis. I learned about it during a deep dive into cryptography forums. Transformed the sound into an image. A string of numbers that looked like GPS coordinates. By this time, I was obsessed. I punched the numbers into Google Maps, half expecting to end up in the middle of an ocean. Instead, they pointed to a street corner in Warsaw, Poland. Of course, I wasn't going to fly to Poland. Others working on the puzzle shared images of the clue they found. A laminated poster taped to a light pole, featuring the same black and white imagery and a QR code. Scanning the code led to another page, but this time it required a key to decrypt. That's when I realized the puzzles weren't just about intelligence. People in forums collaborated, sharing their progress as we pieced together the solutions. One solved cipher led to another set of coordinates, then another, spreading across the globe like a network. Each piece made us feel closer to answering the larger question. What is this, really? But the more I solved, the more I became obsessed. I decoded the PGP key that unlocked the next step. Then, the final puzzle cycle came. The final puzzle cycle felt different. It wasn't just a code to break or a text to decrypt. It was a test of patience and precision. The PGP key I'd received weeks earlier was the gatekeeper, verifying my identity and granting access to an unlisted Tor page. The page was bare, a single black screen with a string of numbers that had no immediate meaning. Hours turned into days as I chased down every possible lead, cross-referencing them with literature, mathematical sequences, even star charts. After several more puzzle cycles solved, with passages pulled from Agrippa, by William Gibson, I found myself at what I didn't know at the time would be my final puzzle. Decoding it, using the Book of Soiga, revealed an email address, plain and unspectacular. I sent a message, my hands trembling, and received a reply within seconds. You have come far, but the journey is not over. Welcome. Then the page disappeared, and my screen went dark, leaving me staring at my own reflection, anxious to see what happens next. For a moment, I began to wonder if I had made some mistake and been kicked out, or worse, if the whole thing had just been one giant hoax. But as I sat and thought, I heard the faintest of clicks, and the light on my webcam turned on. What the foo? I said quietly to myself, frozen in my chair. It only stayed on for a few seconds before clicking back off. Up until this point, I was going from goal to goal, obsession and curiosity fueling me. But with it now seemingly complete, the gratification was now wearing off, and a feeling of regret was slowly creeping in. Was this all a waste of time? What did I just allow into my life? What if it is something illegal? That is the extent of what most people know about the mystery. But what most people don't know is that that was only the beginning. The very tip of the iceberg. They were being truthful. It was a test to find intelligent individuals. But if people knew what they truly wanted them for, nobody would have ever participated. Nothing more happened that day after the webcam incident. I convinced myself it had been nothing, a malfunction, or maybe I imagined it. Maybe it was just the end of the puzzle, nothing. Perhaps I had messed something up along the way, missed a key clue, or I just wasn't chosen. Or maybe it had all been an elaborate hoax from the start. Something designed to mess with people like me, who are too obsessive to see reason. I told myself it was time to move on, maybe even take a break from Reddit altogether. For the first time in weeks, I let myself breathe again. I focused on the mundane. Work a few casual outings, the things I'd neglected for so long. My life went back to normal. It didn't last for long though. I was getting off work, walking home like usual. While walking, I started to notice a man in a black suit following behind me. He kept a steady pace, making every turn I made. It felt weird, but I shrugged it off. There are lots of people who walk in a city, after all. I picked up some food at the grocery store on the way, nothing special. But as I walked in, I noticed the second guy in a suit standing near the entrance. He didn't look like he was shopping, just standing there, waiting, staring in my direction. I began to feel creeped out, but tried to push it out of my mind and do my shopping. While I was in one of the aisles, I saw another man in a suit. He walked past the aisle I was in and looked directly at me, then kept going. He didn't stop or say anything, just walked by, but it felt off. By this time, I started getting uncomfortable, positive I was being watched. I hurried through the rest of my shopping and went to the checkout. I left the store, trying not to think about it, but as I walked down the street, I saw the first guy again, a few paces behind me, walking in the same direction. He wasn't in a hurry, just walking at the same pace, keeping his distance. I looked back once, and he didn't seem to notice, but I felt like he was still there, following me. I knew by this time, it wasn't just a coincidence. I was being followed. I decided to break out into a run, wanting nothing more than to get to the safety of my home as quickly as possible. When I got to my apartment, I rushed upstairs and locked the door behind me. I stood by the window, trying to shake off the weird feeling, but as I peeked down at the street below, I saw something that made my heart race. A black SUV pulled up slowly in front of my building, then just stopped. I couldn't see who was inside, but I knew it was there for a reason. I knew it had something to do with what had been happening, the puzzles. I freaking knew it was something illegal, I thought to myself. Probably the FBI or something. I heard a knock at the door. Just 2 firm knocks. I peered through the peephole. 2 men in suits stood outside, staring at the door like they knew I was watching. I froze in fear, unsure of what to do. They didn't say anything, didn't move, just stood there. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding. I ignored it, hoping they would just go away. But then it happened again. A few hours later, another knock, same 2 men. I didn't dare look through the peephole again, but I could hear their footsteps outside. Every few hours, the knocks would come, always the same. No words, no warning. Just the sound of knuckles against wood. I began to realize by this point, they weren't leaving, and I wasn't getting out of this. I called out of work the next couple of days, not wanting to go outside. The SUV had not moved, and I didn't want to confront whatever was waiting for me out there. Days went by, and the food supply in my apartment began to dwindle. It was also the end of the weekend, and I knew I couldn't call out more days at work. Knowing I had no choice but to go outside, I left my apartment. As soon as I reached the sidewalk, I saw them. The two men in suits, the same ones who'd been following me, were stepping out of the black SUV. They moved toward me with purpose, their expressions unreadable. I froze, my blood running cold. One of them spoke first, his voice flat and direct. "We need you to come with us." My heart started to race, and I could feel a lump forming in my throat, and tears welling up in my eyes. The panic hit me like a wave. I opened my mouth to protest, but all I could manage was a stammer. I didn't do anything. "You've got the wrong person." "I don't." Before I could get another word out, one of them raised a hand, cutting me off. "Relax," he said, his tone calm but insistent. "You're not in any trouble. We're the ones you've been interacting with. Again, we need you to come with us. I assure you, you're not in any danger." I don't know why, but I believed him. Maybe it was the calmness in his voice, the way he seemed so sure of himself, or maybe it was the curiosity slowing building inside of me, eager to finally get the answers I had been so desperate to find. Without a word, I nodded. The man didn't hesitate. He motioned for me to follow, and I did, stepping toward the black SUV. He opened the door for me, and I climbed into the back seat. Once I slid into the back seat, one of the men handed me an eye cover, one of those sleep masks, and a pair of headphones. The music in the headphones was soft, classical, but the gesture felt more like an instruction than a suggestion. He didn't ask if I was okay with it. He just handed them to me, and before I could say anything, he spoke again, calm as ever. "It's just our policy, as a precaution," he assured me. "You won't be wearing them long." At that point, I figured I was already too far in, so I didn't hesitate. I put the mask on first, then the headphones. The classical music began to filter in, smooth and steady. My mind was still racing, but I saw through what they were doing. Classical music, with its intricate layered structure, was meant to confuse my senses. It's strange how sound plays a crucial role in helping your brain orient itself. The way your ears pick up cues from your surroundings, and allow you to determine direction, even without seeing. By flooding my senses with music, they were throwing off my internal compass, blocking my ability to track where we were going. I could feel the change in the car's movement, starting, stopping, turning, but the music kept my mind from getting a clear fix on it. The car came to a stop, and I felt one of the men grab my forearm. He guided me out of the car, and we started walking. The ground beneath me was hard, and I knew we were outside. The ground shifted from concrete to carpet, and the air around me shifted, and I knew we had entered a building. Eventually, we reached what I recognized as an elevator. The elevator started moving upward, and went on for a long time, way longer than I expected, before it finally stopped. They led me out of the elevator, and we kept walking. By this time, I was freaking out inside. I started to wonder if they were going to kill me. Maybe they brought me up to the roof, and were going to throw me off. But just as I started thinking about making a run for it, they removed my mask and headphones. I found myself standing in a huge, upscale penthouse. It was far beyond anything I'd ever seen in person. Everything about it screamed extreme wealth. The floors were polished marble. Shelves lined the walls, filled with artwork, old books, and other expensive-looking things I couldn't even name. A large chandelier hung from the ceiling, and dark red curtains covered every window, blocking out any chance of seeing the outside, or getting a clue about where I was. This seemed intentional to me, another measure to block out any chance of me pinpointing where this was location, against the cityscape. The men who had been with me since the SUV now positioned themselves by the door, and against the wall, standing still, like statues. Their presence was unnerving in its own right, but I couldn't focus on them for long. At the far end of the room, an eccentric older man was sitting in a plush chair. He was dressed in a tailored suit, his graying hair wild, and his eyes sharp, almost like he was studying me as I stood there. With a slow, deliberate motion, he gestured for me to come closer. Come in, he said, excitedly. I hesitated for a moment, but there didn't seem to be a choice. I walked towards him, feeling a mix of curiosity and unease, wondering what exactly I had just stepped into. The man in the chair had a completely different vibe than the others. While the suited men were cold, reserved, and businesslike, he was eccentric, almost childlike in his enthusiasm. His eyes sparkled as he looked at me, his smile wide, and his voice lilted with excitement. Well, the young puzzle solver, he said, his tone full of pride. You cracked the code. I must say, I had my doubts, but I've never been so impressed. You're something special. His hands clapped together with exaggerated flair, almost as if he were putting on a performance. He spoke in a way that was over the top, with a showmanship that felt deliberate. I didn't know how to respond at first. His energy was contagious, and a part of me felt swept up in it. Thanks, I muttered, unsure of what else to say. He laughed and waved his hand. No need for modesty. You've done something most people could never even dream of. Tell me, how does it feel to know you've cracked something? So far-reaching, so elusive. I could barely keep up with his enthusiasm. I don't really know yet. I mean, everything's been weird. Yes, of course, he said with a dismissive wave. But let's not focus on the strange bits, You're here now, and I think we can make this night something memorable. He stood up and motioned to a nearby table. Come, let's eat. After all, you've earned it. He led me to a long, dark cherry wood table set for two. The men in suits stood to the side, almost blending into the background, and the air filled with the scent of something mouth-watering. I couldn't help but sit, now completely intrigued by what was unfolding. The dinner was beyond anything I could have imagined. First, a delicate lobster bisque, served with a touch of cream and a dash of truffle oil, smooth and rich. Then, seared foie gras, paired with a sweet fig reduction and a thin slice of toasted brioche. Next came a Wagyu beefsteak, perfectly marbled, grilled to a perfect medium rare, and topped with a tangy balsamic glaze. The sides were simple, but divine, roasted heirloom carrots and a creamy potato that melted in your mouth. For dessert, a small but exquisite dark chocolate with a raspberry coulis drizzled on the side, rich and bittersweet. The meal was decadent, the best meal I had ever had, as a matter of fact. Far better than the cheap takeout I was accustomed to. By the time I finished, I felt both relaxed and almost entranced by how perfect everything had been. The man sat back in his chair, watching me closely, seemingly pleased with the effect his dinner had. Good, isn't it? He asked, a smile on his face. Yeah, it's incredible, I said, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction. The whole evening, the food, the place, it was all so surreal, but I was enjoying every second of it. As I leaned back in my chair, digesting both the meal and everything that had happened, the man stood up with a flourish. He returned to a side table and pulled out two perfectly banded stacks of cash. $10,000 each, setting them down in front of me. A token of appreciation for your work, he said, patting me on the back in a fatherly manner. You did well, my brilliant young friend. I couldn't help but smile, the weight of the cash in front of me, almost too much to process. He handled it like it was nothing to him, pocket change, but to me, this was life-changing. Then, he lowered his voice slightly, and I noticed a sudden change in his demeanor. But there's more, of course. We've got something else in mind for you. He slid the cash aside and leaned in slightly. There's another puzzle we need cracked, one that's been eluding us for a long time. My associates and I have tried everything. But you've got a gift. The way you think, the way you approach things, it's rare. We're offering you a sum of money, far more than what you see here, to crack this final puzzle for us. I sat there, processing his words. The idea of taking on another puzzle, especially one that had stumped them for so long, was tempting. The challenge, the allure of something bigger. I couldn't resist. I nodded slowly. Yeah, I'll do it. He smiled widely, pleased. Good, we'll be in touch soon, he said, tapping me on the shoulder like I was a good child who had just earned his reward. Enjoy your time here, and remember, there's a lot more where that came from. The weight of his words settled in as I sat there, staring at the stacks of cash in front of me. The men drove me home, the pockets of cash heavy in my jacket. For several days, I heard nothing. All I could do was wait. I spent the days trying to distract myself, but the thought of that night, and the possibility of making more money, was all I could think of. After a few days, the SUV parked outside of my apartment. I didn't have to think twice. I knew exactly what it meant. I approached the SUV with a mixture of anticipation and excitement. The men were sitting in the vehicle, watching me, and as soon as I reached the door, one of them got out and opened it for me. I could hardly keep the smile from my face. Hey, good to see you guys, I said, trying to sound casual, but my nerves were all over the place. The man didn't respond. He just handed me the same eye cover and headphones from before, like it was routine now. I didn't hesitate this time. I knew what was coming. I put them on without a word. The classical music started up again, and the world outside was blocked off. The drive was shorter this time though. The time seemed to pass quickly, but I still had no idea where we were going. The car finally stopped, and one of the men gently guided me out. We went up a set of stairs, and then they directed me into a chair. It wasn't until I was sitting there that I started to piece things together. I recognized the muffled vibrations that hinted we were moving. When the plane finally took off, the sensation of the ground disappearing beneath me confirmed it. We were in the air. I had no idea where they were taking me, but the idea of being on a plane made it feel more serious, more real. After a while, the men removed my eye cover and headphones. I blinked, adjusting to the light, and I looked around. I was in a small, though upscale, private jet, high in the sky. The flight attendants passed by, glancing at me briefly, but no one said anything. We were in the air for some time before we started descending. Once we landed, the men quickly replaced the eye cover and headphones. The plane taxied for a while, and then we were driving again. I was starting understanding that this was a much bigger operation than I had ever imagined. This wasn't just some bored rich guy. Whatever he wanted me to do, it must mean something, to go through all of this trouble and expense. When the car stopped, I was led outside. The sun was blinding after being in the dark for so long, and the air smelled fresh, like grass and earth. I squinted and looked around. There was a huge stretch of open land, fields of tall grass and rolling hills, and scattered rocks in the distance. It felt isolated, almost untouched. In front of me was the building. A massive, old stone structure that looked like a giant abandoned Catholic church. The outside was worn and weathered. Dark stone covered with ivy. They led me up the stairs and through the large wooden doors. The moment we stepped inside, it felt like a completely different world. The place was huge. The stone walls were hidden behind rich tapestries and fancy curtains. The floors were shiny marble, and there were elegant light fixtures hanging from the ceiling. The building had been renovated into looking like a luxury hotel. The cold, old exterior was just a mask for what was inside. There were people in the room, dressed in dark suits, standing around talking quietly. The man from before, the one I met in the penthouse, spotted me immediately. His face lit up. "Ah, there he is," he said, sounding excited. "Welcome. Welcome to our little hideaway." I looked around, trying to take everything in. The people here weren't saying much, but their eyes were all on me. "Sorry for all of the trouble, my boy," he continued. "Never can be too careful, but we are glad you are here. The others have so been looking forward to meeting you, and we have been waiting anxiously for your arrival, so that we may finally get started." "Get started on what, exactly?" I asked, hesitantly. "Only the mystery of all mysteries. The puzzle to conquer all puzzles. The code to crack all codes." He eagerly continued, growing more animated. "For decades, my associates and I have been trying to crack it." The man's expression turned serious as he motioned for me to sit. "What we have for you," he said slowly, "is something far more intricate than what you've done before. It's an old puzzle, something that's been around for centuries, and no one has been able to crack it, not yet." He stood up and walked over to a large table, pulling out a thick, old manuscript. The pages were yellowed with age, edges frayed, and it had that distinct, musty smell. As he opened it, he laid out a page in front of me. The writing was unlike anything I'd ever seen before, an ancient script that looked both familiar and foreign at the same time. The symbols were intricate, almost flowing into one another, forming shapes and patterns. "The manuscript was discovered in a remote monastery in Syria," he continued. "It's believed to have been written by a group who guarded advanced knowledge. The puzzle within these pages has baffled historians and cryptographers for hundreds of years, but it's more than just a code. It's a key to something much greater." I looked down at the page, my mind immediately grappling with the complexity of the symbols. Some of the symbols resembled ancient languages, like Sumerian or Old Latin, but others were completely alien. There were no obvious clues, no easy cipher to break. It was as if the puzzle was designed to resist anyone trying to solve it, to keep its secrets locked away. "The first part is a sequence of symbols," he explained, "but the order is hidden within the layout itself. The shapes are not random. They're encoded in the positions on the page, the angles of the symbols, even the spacing between them. You need to figure out not only what each symbol means, but how they fit together. It's a multi-layered puzzle. Some of the symbols are phonetic, others are mathematical, and some seem to be a form of astronomical calculation." I ran my fingers over the page, trying to take it all in. There was a section of what appeared to be a star chart, but the constellations were different from any I knew. The stars didn't match up with anything in modern astronomy. Below it was a set of numbers, but they were written in an unfamiliar script, with some numbers missing or crossed out, as if they were part of a sequence, but intentionally obscured. "It's not just about deciphering a code," he said, leaning in closer. "It's about understanding what's been hidden in plain sight for centuries. The authors were secretive for a reason. The puzzle points to something that's been buried, something powerful." I couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. The online puzzles had been complicated, sure, but this was on a whole different level. He continued, "There have been plenty before you who have tried. We posted the test online hoping to find someone different, someone who thinks outside of the box. If you can't solve it, we will still be grateful for your efforts, but we hope that you can." After being shown to a spacious bedroom, I was left alone, where I stayed for days. They brought me meals 3 times a day, each one better than the last, but none of it mattered. All I could think about was solving the puzzle, and whatever prize would surely await me at the end. The first few days were a blur. I tried to immerse myself in the manuscript, to understand the symbols, but it felt like grasping at smoke. The more I looked at it, the more I became convinced that I was missing something. I tried everything, decoding the symbols like a cipher, rearranging the pages, reading through old books on Sumerian, testing out every possible method I knew. But every time I thought I had made progress, something would trip me up. I'd hit a dead end, and the frustration would mount. Then, on the 4th day, I noticed something. I was staring at the star chart again, trying to make sense of the constellations, when I realized that one of the symbols, the one that had been throwing me off for so long, was identical to an old alchemical symbol I had seen once, in a book. It was subtle, almost hidden, but it was there. I started to see other symbols like it, symbols I recognized from forgotten corners of my education. Symbols I had studied in obscure texts, long-forgotten works on ancient mathematics and astrology. It wasn't just a code, it was a blending of disciplines. The puzzle wasn't meant to be solved in one way. It had layers, and I had to peel them back one at a time. The sequence of symbols I had been staring at was tied to old astronomical charts, yes, but it was also linked to alchemical processes and ancient number theory. The order wasn't linear. I realized that some symbols were meant to be read backwards, others were mirrored, and some only made sense when connected to physical measurements, things like the angle of the stars at certain times, or the ratios of certain numbers when translated into geometric shapes. I started to sketch out everything I saw, patterns, connections, different sequences. I took out a ruler, a protractor, and even a compass I found in the drawer. Every angle, every measurement mattered. It was like putting together a puzzle within a puzzle. Each discovery was a small victory, but with each piece I connected, I felt closer to the answer. It was an exhausting process. My mind spun, and my eyes blurred from staring too long, but eventually, it all started to make sense. As I continued to work through the manuscript, something finally clicked. After days of staring at the symbols, the numbers, and the strange geometric patterns, I realized this wasn't just an abstract puzzle. It was a recipe, an ancient formula, disguised as a code. The symbols, the shapes, the constellations, they all were steps in a process that seemed to require both precise ingredients and specific actions. I began to break it down piece by piece. The sequence of symbols represented different elements, each symbol standing for a specific ingredient, almost like a shopping list. Some ingredients were rare and complex, others were simpler, but they all had to be combined in precise amounts. The measurements weren't in normal units, like cups or grams, but in older, forgotten measurements. Each symbol wasn't just an abstract clue, it was a direction for what to do next, a set of instructions. The patterns I'd been staring at were steps in a very specific, detailed process, a ritual. With the ingredients and directions laid out in front of me, everything clicked into place. My heart raced as the solution unfolded in my mind. It was all so clear now. I burst out of the room, practically shouting, "Eureka!" The words felt good to say, like I'd been waiting for this moment for my entire life, and now it was here. I had cracked it. The men in the room froze. Their eyes widened, and a few even stood up. I could see the disbelief in their faces, mixed with something like awe. I'd done it. They gathered around me, silent, all attention focused on me. As I began to explain my findings, piece by piece, they didn't interrupt. They didn't speak, just watched, listening intently. It was clear they had been waiting for this moment, the moment when the code was finally broken. A mixture of shock and admiration was written across their faces. No one had expected me to actually pull it off. As I laid out the steps in the order I had deciphered, I watched their expressions shift. They seemed impressed, but there was something else there, something deeper. Maybe it was excitement, maybe fear. But there was no mistaking it. They knew that the answer I had found was something monumental, something they'd been waiting for, hoping for. One of the men broke the silence, his voice sharp and urgent. "We must get started right away. Let's not waste any time." His words were like a spark that set the room into motion. Suddenly, they were all up and moving, speaking in quick hushed tones, making phone calls, pulling out their phones to send messages, and scribbling things on scraps of paper. It was like they had been waiting for this moment their whole lives, and now they were ready to execute it without hesitation. I stood there, frozen for a moment, watching them move with a frantic, almost desperate sense of purpose. Wait, I thought, suddenly gripped by doubt. Are they really going to try this? I'd been so focused on solving the puzzle that I hadn't even considered what this might mean. What were they planning to do with this knowledge? Was it just a game to them? Or was something much more unfolding right before my eyes? I glanced around at the men, who were now deep in conversation with others on the phone, giving quick orders, moving with a sense of urgency. My mind raced. Was I in over my head? Was this all really happening? And what exactly were these instructions for, that I'd helped them decode? I trembled slightly as I tried to take it all in. I wanted to ask more questions, but something told me it was too late for that. The wheels were already in motion. I walked up to the penthouse man, feeling out of place amidst the chaos. "So, what now?" I asked, trying to mask my unease. "Do I get paid or something?" My voice came out more sarcastic than I intended, but I couldn't help it. After everything, I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but the promise of cash seemed like a safe bet. He turned to me, a wide grin spreading across his face. "Money," he said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "You've got it. Consider that handled." His laugh was light, almost dismissive, like the idea of money was a trivial detail. "But what you really get," his tone shifted, his eyes gleaming with a kind of fervor that sent a chill down my spine. "What you really get is something far more valuable than money." I stared at him, unsure if I liked where this was going, and that is. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping, as if he were sharing a secret meant only for me. "A front row seat, my boy. A front row seat to something far bigger than you could ever imagine." I didn't know how to respond. His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Far bigger than I could imagine. What did that even mean? Whatever it was, I wasn't sure I wanted to be this close to it. But before I could ask anything more, he turned back to the others, his focus already elsewhere, leaving me standing there with more questions than answers. But what could I do? I didn't even know where I was, and judging by the landscape, I was far away from anything, or anyone. I had no choice but to ride this out. Hours passed as strangers came and went, carrying crates, bags, and equipment I couldn't begin to identify. Nobody explained anything to me, and I was too nervous to ask. I just sat there, watching, trying to piece together what was happening as the preparations continued. Eventually, someone came to get me. I was led into a large room, and the sight stopped me in my tracks. The walls were paneled with sleek, black wood that absorbed the light, and the floor was made of polished black stone. The room was large and empty, except for a single table at the far end. But as large as it was, I felt claustrophobic. I felt like a cat being forced into a bathtub. I wasn't sure what was going to happen in that room, but I knew instinctually I didn't want to go in. The men began filing in, one by one. This time, there were no conversations, no pleasantries. They moved with a quiet, deliberate purpose. Someone walked to the center of the room holding a stack of small black boxes. One by one, he handed a box to each man. Nobody said a word. I watched, heart pounding, body sweating, as they opened their boxes. Inside, each held a carefully folded red robe. Without hesitation, they all removed the robes and began putting them on, the vibrant red contrasting sharply with the blackness of the room. That was the moment it clicked. This wasn't just some secret government project, or some eccentric hobby for rich people. Was this some sort of cult, some kind of cult for rich guys, who were now preparing to perform some ritual that I had unknowingly helped them bring to life? My mind was racing, every fiber of my body screaming at me to leave, to make a run for it, but I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by fear. This wasn't normal. This wasn't just some intellectual game or a test for an intelligence agency candidates. This was something far darker. The ritual began with low, rhythmic chanting. The words were guttural and unfamiliar, their cadence unnatural, like something pulled from an ancient nightmare. The men moved in perfect unison, following my instructions, ingredients carefully placed. The candle's flames began to shift unnaturally, bending and twisting as if being pulled by some unseen force. The chanting grew louder, more frantic. A swirling mass of smoke and fire erupted in the center of the circle. It grew rapidly, turning into something horrifying, a shape that defied logic. I stood, frozen, shocked at what I was seeing. Something impossible, otherworldly. An entity appeared in the center, through the flames. Its head was a mix between that of a wolf and a goat, twisted and grotesque, its fiery eyes glowing. The rest of its body was covered in coarse, dark hair, with inverted legs like those of some nightmarish demon. The room filled with the stench of rot and burning, so overpowering it made my stomach churn. I felt hands grab me from behind. Two of the men dragged me forward, their grips like iron. "What are you doing? Let me go!" I screamed, thrashing and kicking, but they held me tight, dragging me toward the creature. Tears streamed down my face as panic overwhelmed me. One of the robed men stepped forward and addressed the entity, his voice steady and reverent. "Oh, mighty Nam Taru, we resurrect you, and bring you a brilliant mind and a strong body for you to possess. Accept this offering, and bestow upon us your power." The entity moved closer, its massive, clawed hands reaching out toward me. I could feel its heat, its presence, something ancient and evil pressing against my soul. In pure primal fear, I began to shout out any prayer I could remember from childhood, begged to Jesus, God, anyone. The smell of decay and sulfur was suffocating. Its hands landed on my face, searing my skin with unbearable pain. I screamed, louder than I ever had in my life, the pain consuming everything. And then darkness. I woke up in my apartment. Everything was eerily normal, as if none of it had happened. My head throbbed, but I was alive. I ran to the mirror, finding my face to look completely normal. I looked around, and that's when I saw the several briefcases, neatly stacked by the door. I opened the first one to find it stuffed with cash, crisp bills, packed tightly together. I never heard from any of them again. Not a phone call, not a letter, no SUV lingering outside my apartment. The money, though it was real, it changed everything. I paid off my debts, moved into a better apartment, and started living a life I never thought possible. For a while, it felt like maybe, just maybe, I'd come out of all this ahead. Several years went by before they started, the blackouts. At first, they were small. I'd wake up on the couch, unsure how I got there. I chalked it up to stress, maybe exhaustion catching up with me, but then it got worse. Much worse. I started losing hours, even a full day once. Sometimes I'd be out running errands, grocery shopping, walking through the park, and the next thing I knew, I was waking up in my bed, with no memory of how I got there. My shoes would still be on, my wallet still in my pocket. Other times, I'd wake up in strange places, an alley, a park bench. I have no memory of the gaps, and no idea what I do during them. I've been asking myself the questions I'd been avoiding since the ritual. What did they do to me? What did I help them unleash? And most importantly, what is happening to me now? I don't know what to do next. But the blackouts have been getting worse. And I'm missing more and more time.